Welcome to episode number 1 of Rep by Rep podcast with Coach Nic Higgins. Nick, thanks for joining us today, man.
Yeah, man. Appreciate having me on. I'm looking forward to talking a little shop.
Yeah, so why don't you give everybody a little bit about your background, where you've been, who you worked with, who you're working with now, all that stuff.
Yeah. So I'm originally from the suburbs of Chicago, from St. Charles. I went to the University of Wisconsin La Crosse for my undergrad, and I actually was in education to start my first couple of years. And I played football the first 2 years. And my roommate was kind of telling me, he's like, you love the weight room, and my goal was always just to coach and teach. And I thought, a perfect fit would be a high school science, math teacher, something like that, coach football on the side. And so he was telling me actually more about weight training. And, we really didn't have a program at that time, like working with us. And he had transferred from Minnesota. And I just so happened to kind of looked a little bit more into it. And the exercise science program was really good at UWL. So I made the switch and did a couple of job shadows. I did one at a high school. So I did one with the Chicago Bulls under Eric Helland, and then another at Minnesota under Bob Rohde, Cal, and Sarah. And just for the day, just try to see if this is really something I want to get into. And at the end of the day in Minnesota, Bob Rohde offered, he's like, if you don't have anything going on this summer, why don't you come intern for us? And I really hadn't taken many classes or anything like that. So my first experience was working under Bob, Sarah, and Cal. And it was an amazing summer, and it kind of solidified that I wanted to do this. So I actually went back, then interned at UWL. And at the time, they had just hired Kevin Schultz, who was the director, who is now at the University of Wisconsin as the director for Olympic sports. So I spent my senior year interning with him. And then when I graduated, I moved down to Austin, Texas. I was there for about 2.5 years. I worked both in football and Olympic in a part-time and an in-time role. But it was a really good experience for me. And ultimately, I ended up going back to Chicagoland area to DePaul University. I worked under Dr. John Waggle as well as Jimmy Duba. I was there for about 3 years. I assisted for women's soccer, men's golf, and then had all of track and field. And then after that, and for the past 3 years, and going on my 4th season here at the University of Washington now, where I primarily work with men's crew, softball, and then throwers for track and field while assisting with the rest of our Olympic sports and kind of taking a little bit more in our internship and some of the sports science aspects.
Nice, man. All right, so I see that you're getting out more, doing some crew work on your own. It looks like, as far as just general fitness and health and stuff like that. But
trying to, man, I got a firsthand experience when I was down in Austin. They had a pretty good following, but moving out here to Seattle and Boys in the Boat, and just it's rich in history. So it's been really fun to be a part of, the winning tradition and just everything that both the men have done in these past few years. And our women's program with Yaz does a phenomenal job, and they're champions, I think, 2 out of the last 3 years at the national stage. So rowing is a huge product here in Seattle, and it's a lot of fun to be a part of. And then we host the U23 national team, or we have been for the past 2 summers. So getting to work with the U23 national team has also been a great experience. So actually rowing is taking a lot of work, and it's been awesome.
Yeah, man. So we were talking just before we got started about, you said you've basically seen your first full class all the way through. So they come in as freshmen, and have they graduated yet, that senior class, or are they coming up on their senior year?
We're coming right up to it.
Okay.
And I was just short at DePaul, so I'm pretty excited for here at Washington to get through one entire class.
Right. So when they come in, what have you seen so far about, do these athletes come from good strength programs, or, is everybody coming in and you're starting them at a block zero kind of deal, or how's it working for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So if we take a group that I have right now, so my throwers come in with a relatively strong base. I wouldn't say all of them do, but majority at least have some background in most of the exercises. Olympics are probably a little skewed a bit. Again, we snatch, clean, and jerk in terms of all our throwers here. So they usually have just a grasp of the clean, some of the snatch, and not so much the jerk. Mm-hmm. And so I would say they do a pretty good job as our transition in our first 3 to 4 weeks. And their assessment and evaluation is a little bit faster than necessarily what I do with my other sports. If you looked at that compared to rowing, for example, we have probably a third of our team is international, and it's mixed between they have done no weight training, and this is their first time walking into a weight room, or they have a pretty good background in it. And actually more of the barrier that we get into is just making sure our terminology and the way that I'm cueing or talking is either related and then they understand, because sometimes it's a second or third language. So I really have to focus a little more on my coaching and breaking down or using analogies that they're going to understand. But again, it's kind of like a mixed bag, and rowing is really starting to pick up now in terms of strength conditioning. It's, again, probably not necessarily used across all programs at the United States level, and internationally still not as well. So it's kind of 50-50. And then softball, most of them come in with a good base. And I think it's something you're starting to see now with softball and baseball, kind of this like youth development push. And I wouldn't say AAU, but you're seeing a lot more of these private facilities that do, specialize in baseball or softball training. And so they're coming in with a pretty good base. And it's been exciting for me to view my progressions and how much they've changed or regressions, or even, like you said, block zero. When an athlete walks in and how you first identify and what you think is the proper scaling. Like, it's now fun to look back and see what I did my first year. I was so different in how I progressed my athletes to then last year. And then even this year, like my progressions for the two groups I'm going to work with is so much different. I think it's my involvement is my learning, but it's also, like you said, it's getting a better understanding of where they're coming at and having a better progression set for them.
Yeah, I've definitely gone back and looked at some of the programs I've written in the past, and I'm like, God, what the hell was I doing, man? But I think that's pretty common across the board, though.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe you can follow with this. Sometimes I may be unrealistic in expectations. I think like, oh, they're going to know how to do a front rack position, or they're going to know how to do this, or it's the opposite. Like, okay, I'm going to have to body weight squat them for 6 weeks before we go to goblet, to two kettlebell, to misloaded. And so it is really like each team, and we'll use my perspective again, rowing, throwers, and softball. Their progressions are all different based off their experience. And so for
Mm-hmm.
me, I have a stages, or I know like my squat, hinge, lunge, and some of those patterns that I'll go through, and whether it's manipulating tempo or pattern position, whatever it may be, it's definitely evolved. But I would say each program now kind of has a little bit of how fast we're going to push them forward, or how long we actually like set in our blocks. I mean, for you, for example, what are some things that you really try to do with your block zero, or when you first start working with athletes?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like you helped me out a couple weeks ago when I come in this new position with the Air Force. Is you have a lot of guys who are freak show athletes, but they really have no experience in the weight room of any kind. So um, when we were talking about assessments a few weeks back, about assessments and evaluation and that kind of thing, I can tell a lot just by seeing them literally walk in the weight room and see compensatory patterns that they have. And then from there, I just ask them, hey, can I see a basic? Let me see a lunge with no coaching or instruction, because I want to see what they're naturally doing. Can I see what your body weight squat looks like right now? And just looking at that will tell me a lot about training age. And then we get into a whole thing about training age and biological age are not synonymous. There are some things that you have to be able to, in my eyes, you have to be able to display competency before I will feel good about you loading an exercise.
Yeah, because what's the age group that you're now working with?
Yeah, this is a different beast, man. It's 19 to 33 is
Yeah.
the oldest. So I mean, coming from EA most recently, where it was all youth, which was more of like sixth grade up to, like, we have some guys who are professional, like MLB players or whatever,
Mhm.
but primarily junior high, high school. These guys are just a different animal. I mean, they're a different mindset. They're all about trying to push, 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 and it's more of like pulling back the reins and saying, "Hey, let's look at this. Let's understand supercompensation, understand stress, and that kind of thing." Just introducing what you and I would consider basic principles
Yeah.
of strength training, but they've never been taught any of this stuff. So for them, it's hugely beneficial.
Yeah, and so like being an outsider, my assumption, right, is if you're working with those younger athletes or individuals that you're working with, it might be more block zero for you. It's pattern, position, and posture
Yep.
versus maybe someone who's in his mid 20s. Like their block zero is actually more based off of intensities and reps and sets, or
Hmm.
manipulating RPE. And so that's for me in that same boat where I can push, like we talked about, pattern and posture a lot more with my development athletes who don't have a strong history or background versus my throwers who come in who are a little bit more proficient in the movements.
Right.
We're going to do a little bit more from the technical perspective, and like that's how we'll progress them through. And then we can push a little bit more of the intensity, as well as what I'll usually do is RP to start with, and then
Hmm.
we'll do more of the patterning on the supplement or accessory works. And that's where again we'll kind of do the misloading or the 4-2-0 tempos or things like that. So even staging, whether it's your main movement, supplement, or accessory based off the history. I mean, I imagine that's kind of something that you're maybe working through too.
Yeah, and I definitely gravitate towards more RPE as well. I think And the counter argument there is, how does someone know what their RPE is if they've never trained before? And I certainly understand that, but with all the considerations of what these guys are going through on a day-to-day basis, this sounds blasphemous to say, but the least important thing of their day is what I do with them.
Yeah.
So I I give them guidelines of, hey, percentages should be roughly this, but if you come in, if you had a stressful day, if you're beat up, all that stuff coming into play, man, by all means, like, let's just, I hate to say it, but just go through the motions a little bit and knock
Yeah.
down some of the intensity. I mean, it sounds terrible, but, and then I tell them the counter to that as well. On days where you're feeling great, we're certainly going to add sets and kind of go off the game plan, so to speak. So
You're not working with robots. You got to take the human element into it. I think some of us try to get so caught up into the data or pushing it, and you're exactly right. I mean, if you have the opportunity, right, you can lean on Elite Form, GymAware, Tendo, any of those types of things to help like self-subscribe the loads. But when it's all said and done, you have to read the emotions of the individual, and you're going to have good days and bad days. And like you said, you have to be able to regulate, what's best for that individual on that day, and know that you're going to have days where you can push it and days where you got to back off. It's just part of the game, really.
yeah, and I think it was on I think I saw it on Dr. Waggle's Twitter. It might have been one of his buddies, but anyway, they were talking about how much more data we take in now than ever before, but so many people don't know how to interpret it or apply it. And it's like,
Yeah.
what the hell are we doing? Why are you guys taking this data in the first place if you don't know what you're doing with it?
It's super hard to like identify through the noise what really are your KPIs or some of those things. And
Yep.
I was fortunate for my time under Dr. Waggle, and he like consistently reminds me about that. Whether it's through the force plates or even what we're trying to take and say this is going to transfer back to sport. We really just have to try to bring it down as much as we can, and then identify what the audience is.
Right.
So the KPI for an individual, like a sport athlete, is going to be different than the KPIs that you would then tell a coach or maybe some other support staff member. So understanding that lens is, I think, also important when you're looking at some of these data points is, okay, well, what are 2 or 3 things that the athlete's going to gravitate towards, right? We know jump height something they're always going to be able to identify with.
Right.
It's global. It's maybe not the most important thing, but for them, it's something they can chase. Well, for your coaches, or maybe for you, it's going to be a different one, or for us in the weight room, maybe it's concentric impulse, or some of these other things that are a little more technical. And you have to identify the lens. So like you're saying, I mean, being able to identify the noise and then be able to refer back to who you're speaking with.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, I just use the jump. Like, we just have a just jump mat, and we'll use that as just an indicator light. And then basically, when we're running through our, warm up every day, I tell the guys that, look, that's more of like your check engine light that you're turning on every day. You're looking for things out of the norm that are not normal. You know what I mean? Not usual in your day to day. So, but yeah, that's another thing I wanted to talk to you about with what we've seen with the NFL season so far. So, huge spike in injuries. So is that just lack of preparation, lack of time, and trying to rush full speed? What are your thoughts there?
I don't know, man. It's tough. I truly believe that there's people in those positions who are making the right decisions,
Right.
whether it's through support staff members and everyone else. And this has just been such a unique year with the COVID and, like you said, the changing of the schedules, whether it was the loss of preseason or the rush of the training camp. And we obviously know CBAs and different sports have different reasons for that. And it's so difficult. But, acute and chronic training load is one that people probably bring to mind, or you're going to have these metrics to refer back to. And, Dr. Carl Foster was really the first one, and he was at UWL during my time when he looked at monotony, strain, and score. So, when you go into that second week, you're going to see a significant spike. And for some of these athletes, they've been taking such a long time. You'd have to look back and see what was the difference between non-contact and contact. And for them, if they're generating these more substantial forces the second week, but yet they're in this lower, ability to really train, again, from acute to chronic, if they're not higher, it's unfortunately a recipe for disaster. And, I think it was kind of plagued. But again, I have confidence that the organizations are hiring those from the sports scientists, the strength conditioning, and the rest of the sports staff, that they're making the decisions the best they can. They were given a difficult situation, just again with COVID, with contact time, and the best way to progress. And ultimately, like when said and done, again, we were kind of saying earlier, we're not robots, and so we can create these data points and these training loads, but when you go into sport, there's so much chaos, there's so much environment that we can't control. It is a challenge, and it's a risk that inherently every athlete knows when they step on the court, the turf, whatever it may be. There is a risk of injury. We just saw such a significant spike. It's a challenge. Everyone's going to refer back and want to rush. And again, I don't want to outside judge because it's not my role and it's not my position.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure everyone's now looking back to say, like, is there something that stood out, or was this thing, even something they could avoid? Again, if it was a contact thing and there's just a bad luck, then there's really nothing you can do. But the chaos of sport, the environment, the constraints, and the context of the sport or the play itself is going to change the dynamics. So it's complex. I feel for those who are having to deal and answer those questions now, right? Like going back in the meeting room the next day. I hope that from this that we're going to continue to learn, continue to see. I hope that COVID, solves relatively soon, and this next NFL season is going to be what it was, and there's different preparations and we can learn from it. But yeah, it was a tragic to see. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, man. I mean, the first thing that got my attention was as I saw someone on Twitter talk about there had been 8 Achilles so far this season, and I jumped on it and was like, "There's no way." So I just hopped on, started looking, and sure enough, that was confirmed. There's been at least 8 Achilles, and then was it the entire San Fran D line is out?
It's out.
ACLs or something.
Crazy.
And, so I'm with you. I don't know. I mean, I think it was probably just a rush, but again, I'm not in that environment. But I don't know.
I was speaking to a colleague about it as well, and we talked about the European soccer, who I believe saw also a significant spike. And everyone I believe has to understand that preseason, those first 2 weeks, the 14 acclimation, that's when you're at greatest at risk. And so the loss of the preseason and really going into this, I think you probably were expecting that second and third week. Now, to this extremer level, probably not. So that makes it a bit more of a challenge. But like you said, 8 Achilles, and I forget how many the ACLs were. But it's hard to say if you were to programming, jumps or sprints or anything, if you could really prepare them for this sport and through practice and again through the CBA and how much contact and how much your availability were with those athletes prior to this preseason season itself. It's really hard to say. Just pinpoint like a specific time. Again, it was not necessarily just one team. I think the 49ers unfortunately got the worst, but you saw it across the league. And I think it definitely shook a lot of things. Now, I don't remember with the NBA, and for example, that being the other major sport, or maybe MLB or some of these other that we're going through, if we saw a significant spike like we did in football. And I'm not sure in college football if we've seen anything to this degree. But, yeah, I mean, the NFL, it definitely shook some heads this weekend.
Yeah. That'll be interesting going forward, what changes, if anything, next offseason, But, yeah, so that was next point I wanted to ask you about. So, have you changed any methods, like kind of experimenting with any athletes as far as some things that you've read about or learned that you're using for strength development, that kind of thing?
Coming back from just COVID in general, or?
Just over your past 3 seasons there at UW.
Yeah, I mean, definitely an influence from the people I'm around, which definitely helps. So when I came here 3 years ago, and I was hired on through our director, Todd Tukin, there's a couple other positions who had hired. So I've learned some things along the way from our staff members like Santiago, Chris, Gabby, and Todd himself. And, there's so many things. I would say this past summer, though, has been really good for me. We started something, what we called was the coaches circuit. We connected with about 10 other schools, and through it, I think there was 30 interns. And each week we brought in a different guest speaker. And I can say from this summer, like Nick Winkelman was a huge takeaway. I think a lot of people now are reading his book, and his podcast is becoming a lot more prevalent. And just the dialogue that he has and his ability to communicate, not just to the individuals when they're lifting, but I think like he discussed, pre-briefs and post-briefs as well. And it's just super important, how you're setting the tone with your first conversation. And so I would say one of the things I'm really looking at is how am I structuring what I'm going to say, how I'm going to address the team, how we're going to structure the workout itself so I can break in times to readdress things, or how to do kind of this global then versus like a local or then to the individual level. So, some of the things that Nick had spoken to us through the summer, and then I did a follow-up call, was just making sure what maybe 2 or 3 global things that you're going to try to get over the session, and then really make sure that the athletes are learning. And so he discusses this kind of 2x2 method, but take 20 seconds, have an athlete talk to a different athlete and say, hey, what are you really trying to focus on today? And maybe they're going to pick on something, whether it's, I really want to drive my knee, or yeah, I'm just going to try to beat so and so, and then have them report back. And so then there's this kind of level of ownership when they're going through the session, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
you can remind them, or you even kind of hear like, okay, I hear a lot of the same things over and over from these athletes. That then gives me an understanding, okay, I really need to focus maybe on this so that it can grasp their learning. And, we talked about it more from the sprinting perspective. I think the same could be done in the weights. And so I think this ownership of learning through the student athlete, and then just hearing how you're communicate. Again, he had discussed this in his book, but sometimes what we think we're saying has zero connection to that athlete.
Yep.
Or I'm going to use 10 different things, then ultimately I could have got it done in 4 words.
Yep.
And so I think reevaluating, especially during COVID, everyone's reading a lot more. And for me, it was like sprinting and probably this communication piece that I try to take really deep dive in, either
Mm-hmm.
through the Altus, spending a little bit more time talking with Zach Deacon at TCU and some of the things that he had done. And then through Nick Winkleman as well, is just, okay, now I know the structure of my workouts. I know the drills and skills that I want to be into it, but how am I going to tell that to 30 kids? How am I then going to dive deep into maybe like a small group of 5? And then how do I develop that one-on-one connection? So ultimately my 2 or 3 Qs and his coaching loop, and he kind of talks about his 3Ds, but how is those going to make the biggest impact to that athlete? And at the very end of my session as well, have a post brief. Ask them, okay, what did you really work on really well today? What's something you want to improve on next time? Or have them check in with their individual, right? And say like, hey, this worked really well. This drill didn't feel off. So I think one thing that I really want to try to take away is the learning process, not just for me, but for my athletes, and give them a little bit more ownership.
Yeah, man, I like that. So, I mean, to me, that just sounds like creating the right culture, right? Like you just want to have, here's what my expectations are for the team, for the athletes on an individual level, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I think it's breaking it down. So we're all going to do or at least we do here, is we kind of have maybe a whiteboard and we have just a real skeleton of the workout. We're going to kind of address everything we're going to go through, but then sometimes it just goes through one ear and out the other.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, yeah, you think like they're going to listen to all this, or, he gave this an example in a presentation is maybe you have a big group and it's 30 athletes and we have been told you have to be really loud in the weight room and, you're just going to be queuing left and right. So you're yelling the same 5, 6 or things over and over, but you have no idea if that's sticking with the athlete. And I
Right.
think Nick used the example like, can you recite when you walk on an airplane the safety guidelines? Sometimes you just tune them out, and it's kind of that same thing. Like
That's a good
an
point,
athlete
man.
might, an athlete might just tune you out, and so you're cueing, drive the bar up, head to the ceiling, all these things. But if you're just saying it across, it's kind of like Charlie Brown. It's like wow, wow, wow. So like you have to find ways to gravitate to groups of learners or to the individual learner. And so it might be less time of yelling these global things.
Yeah.
And maybe you're just doing it at the very beginning, like say, hey, I want everyone to focus on these 3 things. And then you say, okay, now I want you to talk to 2 people at your training rack. I want you to tell that one person what's the thing that you're going to work on most, and then they have this like self-identified thing of, okay, this is what I'm really working towards today. And then
Mm-hmm.
you do check-ins, or you kind of see like, okay, let's cue this 1 or 2 things, versus you just kind of walking around the room and saying, again, shoulders to the ceiling, elbows through on the catch. And, it's just kind of bland. It doesn't really
Mm-hmm.
attract them. And so I think for me, it's reevaluating how I operate my sessions to make them more effective and efficient. I feel comfortable with my programming, but it's what's my next step? Because coaching is teaching. And it's like your
Mm-hmm.
teachers don't yell at you when you learn, right?
Right.
They ask you questions, or they use you to communicate back to make sure that you're learning, or they'll try to use different analogies. But coaches and teachers should be doing the same thing. Teachers aren't puffing their chests in the front of the classroom and yelling, right? So we're an extension of teaching, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what coaching is. And then we have to have these check-ins, whether it's at the end of the session or technical proficiency, like, hey, I want to see you hit a 3RM on the clean, and these are 3 things like we're kind of check off to make sure you're good. Those are things that I want to integrate more, because I feel like the nuts and bolts is going to be relatively the same. Small progressions or regressions will change based off athlete's movement or based off what we're trying to capture for that session or for that cycle. And then it's really the day to day. How am I connecting with my athlete? What am I saying to them? How am I relating this back to sport? Does this make sense to them? Versus like, yeah, this works for me and I know it's right, but I have no idea if it's going to work for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, that's really good. As I 100% agree about the teaching aspect because, I talk to athletes like I'm talking to you right now. Like I'm not gonna like I'll scream and yell on occasion, like if we're trying to get after it for like a 1 RM and trying to get all guys around or whatever. But that is so rare. I mean, like,
Yeah.
that's 2% of my year maybe.
You got to keep it real for them, and it has to be engaging and fun. And I think you're right. There's times where it might be a little bit more militant or like you're going to be structured and really off the start. But at some time, there has to be flows and there has to be differences in a session. You have to switch it up a bit, whether it's through music, whether it's through what you're saying, whether it's how you're warming up. It has to still be engaging. And for me, it's like the way I'm communicating. If we're going to squat the entire year, I have to
Mm-hmm.
then change my ability in coaching that squatting so it still stays relevant. It stays fun. It
Right.
stays to the point. I think I said this during our session with Nick, and the athlete's intent has to match the coach's intent.
Mm-hmm.
That being like they understand what you're asking out of them, and the coach is able to correctly get that out of the athletes. And
Yep.
again, using the proper words and putting them in the right situation to succeed. That's really what we're really trying to capture in the weight room.
And I just couldn't believe it this past weekend. So did you watch that Georgia Tech game? Georgia
I
Tech
did not.
football game. Okay, so Georgia Tech football. They had the developmental guys out there. ESPN kind of flashed a thing. You see some GT guys out there doing some curls and stuff like that. Weights get dragged out on the sideline or whatever. So to me, like, that's just a snippet about what's going on within the entire program, within the developmental guys. And the number of people on social media who are shitting on the GT program is crazy because
Yeah.
it's like, number one, whoever's saying a negative comment has no context of what's actually going on. But they're missing the overall point is that coach and that staff has created such a culture where guys want to be doing things. This is a good indicator.
Yeah. Again, it's not for me necessarily to say because I've heard that head strength coach speak and I don't really know what's going on. But look, I'll be honest, I've done game day lifts. Now,
Yeah.
our sessions aren't filmed by ESPN and it wasn't caught, but sure, I let our athletes go in. And if they want to hit some arms before, it's going to put them in the right state, I don't mind it. And yes, I'm sure session prior to it, they were doing their developmental work. But again, it's such a field where I don't ever want people to feel anxious about posting things on social media, right? It should be an opportunity to learn, to connect, to grow, or sometimes just encourage your athletes, like to kind of give them some, hey man, you've been awesome. I actually posted, you, or hey, I want to highlight this female athlete. She's been doing a great job. So when we then do the naysaying or like doing the opposite of it, it's not doing anything necessarily great for the department. And you're right. Like if you had a question or something, it's probably better just to directly ask them. You don't have to rip it apart. And if it was fun for the athletes, if they enjoyed it, if they didn't get hurt, what's the huge deal? And I bet maybe they did do some weighted sprints before. Maybe they did all their lower body stuff. And you know what? They're not getting to play this season. It's probably tough on them. They need a pick me up mentally. Like you want to hit some easy bar curls, go for it. I've done it with my groups. Again, we're just not televised. I've seen it in other programs, right? Unfortunately, maybe it's walk-ons who don't play a ton or not even dressed. They want to go hit a pump. Like, go for it. Have some fun with it. I think you're right. Unfortunately, sometimes people post things on social media, or he probably had no intention of that ever blowing up, and ESPN just caught it, and it just unfortunately turns sometimes negative. But you're right. You've seen the other side, and people speak about the culture of it, and like, you know what, this is probably really good buy-in, or you know what, if their head coach loves it, we work in support staff. We have to support our head coaches. And again, I'm sure at the right times of the year, they aren't just doing easy bar curls. I bet they're sprinting. I bet they're doing traditional weight stuff. And if you listen to their head coach speak, I think he did for COVID first coaches, he talked about how he does 4th of July lifts and he does like sometimes jersey and different themes and wants to have fun with the program. I bet that was one of those things. And you know what? I think that was opening weekend for him, right?
Yeah.
Go have some fun with the development guys. Let them enjoy it. They're grinding, but they're not getting to see, success on the field. So you have to continue to encourage and bring them on.
Yeah, man. I think it kind of goes back to a little bit of placebo effect too, like with, curls or 3 sets of 10 of curls going to make that much of a difference anyway. Like, granted, I know those guys aren't playing, but it's, it's one of those things. Like if it makes you feel good and it psychologically helps you, by all means, whatever.
Go for it. It didn't take away from their performance, at least none of the guys who were probably doing that. So,
right.
Again, I don't want to be up in arms. I want to support the evolution of our field. It's still relatively young. I don't want to give it a bad name. And you just kind of hope from us as coaches, just directly reach out or for us to continue to push in the right direction.
And that's one of the coolest parts about this field, in my eyes, is when you DM people or send them an email, like the good guys will get back to you right away, and like they'll answer your questions. They're here to help. I mean, one of the coolest things for me professionally was Mike Favor.
Mm-hmm.
I think he might still be at University of Michigan. I went up to Michigan when I was in grad school, and he blocked off like an hour just to sit down with me one on one. I was just some random grad student, and he answered questions for me. And
I mean, those are the people you want to be around.
yeah, and you don't forget that stuff either.
Yeah, I mean, I try to set it up this summer where we did this coaches circuit. Every Friday we'd bring an outside speaker, and it was someone who wasn't related to collegiate strength conditioning. And so it was Lee Taff. I had my buddy Ed from
Yep.
the Lakers. We had all sorts. And so I remember Eric with the St. Louis Blues,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there was maybe 6 of us on this call, and he gave up an hour. They were up in Canada in the playoffs, and I just couldn't thank him enough. I said, hey, man, I actually took a lot out of this because I don't know much about the NHL strength conditioning. Like, a huge thank you. And he goes, man, these are the people, like, this is what we're supposed to be doing, right? Helping out those younger coaches or trying to, evolve this. And it was awesome to connect with him, and I'm hoping to connect again with him shortly here. And you're exactly right. We hope that we can just take out time, 15, 20 minutes, or even up to an hour if they have it, and just continue to connect with people. I mean, again, it's a field of learning. We're a field of service. We're trying to support our student athletes and all those that we work with to the best of our abilities. And the only way we can do that is by learning from one another.
Yeah, and that's where I was. That's probably the first place I heard the term was when I was talking to Dr. Sukumal about the term "Mount Stupid." So
Yeah.
basically, when you first get into the field, you think, "Oh man, I know everything," and then the longer you're in the field, the more you realize that you don't know anything. And anyway, man, that's been one of the awesome things about since I got up here is I've ordered probably $600-700 worth of books, and they're all on my shelf, things I've not read before. And I'm like, man, I don't know, I don't know a thing right now. This sucks. But there's just so much information, and trying to decipher it and then relay what's relevant.
Yeah, I'm kind of getting that same way. My books are overflowing. They go in all different directions. But that's the exciting thing is that I feel like I can talk to another coach or pick up this book, and there's one or two things that I'll be able to slide in the program, or I'll read it. I'll read the author, and I'll try to reach out to them and try to continue to learn. And so, yeah, it's just been awesome to be able to learn from so many different coaches. And, like, again, for a field now that's using a lot more through social media on these different platforms to be able to connect with people that I didn't think I'd be able to connect with.
Yeah, man, you just DM people, and I've been surprised how quickly really busy guys get back.
Yeah.
I mean, much like you. I know you've been busy, and I keep seeing all the books that you've been reading. I think the most recent ones I saw, your Jay Shetty one.
Yeah, I just got that one in this week. Think Like a Monk.
How's that?
It's been good. I started listening to his podcast about, maybe a month ago.
Yeah.
He had done something, and then I usually listen to like Daily Stoic, and they speak a lot of kind of similar lines. So I'm about 50, 60 pages in, and it's good because it's so non-strength conditioning.
Right.
But a lot of those things can apply to your relationships, your environment. And for me, it's just really easy at night to spend 20 or 30 minutes. It helps me relax. And again, it gives me a different perspective to like reflect upon the day and say, you know what, I overthought that, or that really wasn't that big of a deal, or you know what, I probably need to reach out to this person. So not that Thinking Like a Monk's going to completely change me, but it's book like, again, I want to take bits and pieces of. I want to take deep work and some of these others to make me really a better communicator, a better facilitator, a better colleague, whether it's through these connections or through the actual everyone that I work with here at UW. And that's really my end goal with some of these books. I mean, what's on your reading docket right now?
Man, so I've been reading all non-training books for probably the past year. So, I just reread like a Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Just financial, just something completely different. But most recently, training wise, I'm on page 67 of Super Training. And
going back,
dude, it's one of those where I'm thinking, oh my God, if I get through 5 pages a day, it's a win.
Yeah, that is dense.
There was another one. I mean, I'm not kidding, man. There's probably about $600 worth of books of training books that I've got from Ultimate Athlete Concepts, and so that has like some German principles, German scientific principles from Hare, I think,
Yep.
Harre. But that one was recommended to me a while back. I just hadn't got around to it. But I think I saw a John Wooden one from you recently, right?
Yeah, that was early in the COVID. I mean, it's
Yeah,
during the quarantine. It's been so long.
yeah, month
Yeah,
one.
that was also a good one.
But yeah, what else do you have? I think I saw Jay Shetty. First time I saw him was on Goalcast, I think.
Okay.
But that was the first place I saw anything from him, and I've really liked what he's had to say in presentations and whatnot. But
Yeah, I mean that's the current one I'm going through. I'm No Hero is another one. You know, it's about a guy who was a prisoner, I believe it was for 6 years in Vietnam. So that's been pretty interesting, and just kind of listening and hearing his perspective. I finished How to Think Like an Astronaut, and again, that was a pretty good one. And you know, I think during this time, it's just allowed me to try to branch my reading out in so many different ways and areas. But I think a lot of us are going through a lot of self reflection during this quarantine, or we have a lot more time to ourselves, and we're trying to probably connect a little bit differently,
yep.
just with us personally. And
Mm-hmm.
so finding some of these books to kind of like recenter myself, especially before work really picks up for us. You know, how am I going to manage the stress or some of the chaos and the anxiety that's going to come? That's where I think a lot more of my reading is kind of shifting to, is just, you know, we tell our athletes they have to improve, but what am I really doing to improve myself? And we, you know, want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. And that's where this reading's been a good outlet for me. Podcast sometimes a little bit harder.
Yeah.
So reading for me is just a little more relaxing.
Yeah, I'll typically pop in some podcasts just when I'm on my drive to work, because I have a just a little podunk vehicle that gets me to and from work, so the radio
Yeah.
doesn't really work. But I'll just listen to podcasts there, or if I'm just doing something like we got some new woodways or whatever. So
Yeah.
just been kind of messing with those, and there's no radio or anything, so I'll be listening to podcasts there. But writing has been helping me a lot, just kind of
Nice.
in terms of processing and things like that. So yeah, I mean, probably the most recent writing that helped was just watching my kids. So,
Hmm.
um, talking to my oldest daughter about no matter what you do, you have to be consistent. You have to be willing to put yourself in uncomfortable situations, and then understanding delayed gratification versus instant gratification. And I think those are very complex concepts for a 5-year-old, but um, just our culture in general is
Hmm.
instant gratification, and especially if you're involved in this field, it's delayed gratification.
Yeah.
So getting used to it.
No, I mean, I give you credit for balancing out the home life, obviously with the children, and then your work, and then, like you said, still being able to find a little bit of time for yourself. I mean, that's the time management piece is so important. Sounds like you
Yeah,
got a lot going on.
yeah. I try to stay a little bit busy, but anyway. Uh, but yeah, man. So recovery wise, like, what's it look like for you guys? I mean, the time off has obviously been good for mental, physical, and all that stuff. But when you guys are back at full go, what kind of recovery modalities do you have for your athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think this year is going to be a little bit unique, due to COVID and the occupancy and where athletes are going to be able to train. But most of our athletes are on I would say, a typical three day model, high low. Tuesdays and Thursdays, we try to do some extensive work, and we'll do it through low extensive hops, medicine ball throws, GPP work. So I've said earlier, you know, Altus has been a pretty big foundation for a lot of the things that I've done with the athletes. And so referring back to some of the Dan Pass recommendations, or Charlie Francis when it comes to the high-low model.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think we're like a lot of schools where if you have the glitz and the glamour to it for the norma and some of these other things, or if you're doing some self and subjective reporting, you kind of get some better things to refer back to. But, you know, I did read some Adola stretching, which I'm going to try to incorporate with our groups, you know, to spend the last 4 or 6 minutes of every session. I think that's probably one thing that maybe us as strength coaches, we overlook, is the cool down. It's
Yeah.
like we spend so much time sequencing and programming warm-ups and progressions of flyos and sprinting, and then it's like, all right, clean up your station, get out of here, grab your protein shake, you know. And it's like I want to spend make sure I spend my 6 to 8 minutes and go through like a proper cool down, and you know, trying to learn a little bit more from the fascial lining and anatomy trains. Like, again,
Mm-hmm.
we talk about some dense material, but again, you're seeing it a little bit more with like the stick mobility starting to come out. We have a couple of those here, and I've watched the best I can the YouTube videos and done some other outside courses. But realigning and resetting is going to be the real key, I think, to recovery. And we can do so much, but we can't control the other 22, 23 hours of student athlete's life. We can try to provide them the right resources, but we understand at 18 to 23, they're going to make the decisions that they want, or they're going to have different finances. Like we could say like, oh, you should cook this meal and do this, that, but it's not practical.
Mm-hmm.
We have to find things that are going to be appropriate for them. And, I did the precision nutrition course last year, and that was a big takeaway too, is identifying what type of abilities they have. And they have these different stages of, I would say like habits and type of eating.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to know how to break it down to like a level one, like
Yep.
what is truly the basics. And so when you take that view, it's the same as recovery. Like you
Mm-hmm.
can't tell them to do all these different things. It's like, hey, I have the control of the last 10 minutes. We're going to go through these 6 stretches. If you really like them, do them on a Tuesday and Thursday. And then it's like, okay, Tuesday and Thursday, I can control the extensive work or the GPP, and I can sequence it out. Some of these other modalities, they're good if they have the capabilities, but if we can teach them to do things on their own, especially when they're on the road traveling or just for their better long term of their health, that's really like a big takeaway is what's our influence for these 5 years that make a habit for the next 40 to 50. I
Right.
think that's a cool thing with college strength and conditioning is you can be a really big influence in their habits post, their athletic experience. Very small percent. We're talking less than one go pro, but
Mm-hmm.
everyone else is going to have to maintain some level of fitness, or we hope that we do. And so teaching them why we do strength training or how to progress, and like a goal for me is to write a book for when athletes essentially graduate. It would be kind of a to-go gift, like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
here's a 40-page manual how to write a workout.
Yeah.
Here's how to properly eat and do these things, because athletes are going to want to go these different directions. Or like, hey, I've always done this, but now I want to run a marathon. Or it's like always been a goal to get into CrossFit, or like some of these things, and if we can create something for them to leave with, and recovery is just one piece of it, that's how we're educating. And I know it kind of went off, but I think recovery and all these things is we have to educate the best of our abilities. We have to put them in situations that they're actually going to be eager or desire to do them. Because if we just continue to throw only modalities at them, when you don't have that piece of equipment or it becomes essentially all they lean on, we have to think of other ways to train them. And we do that for weights. We kind of got to do the same thing for recovery.
Yeah. I think that's great, man. I mean, how soon are you getting that book published?
It's been in the works actually. It's just finding the right uh, way to break down the language.
Yeah.
If we can show these general templates, and I think there's a lot of great resources out there, but what you don't want them to do is to go on just to YouTube or maybe these other sites, and they don't really learn it. They just copy and paste it. So if they have
Right.
something they can refer back to, and they can pick their own schemes and play with it, like so many of my athletes will probably text me 2 or 3 months once they graduate and like, hey, do you have my old workouts? Or, hey, can
Mm-hmm.
you like send me something to do? I'm now at a gym and I don't know what I should do. Then they really didn't necessarily like learn through the process. They've just, copy and pasted the whole time. And so the next step is really like, okay, what can I give you so that you feel self sufficient when you go to a gym and you know how to write a workout? Or like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but that you feel comfortable and confident of like, okay, this is what I'm going to do for the next 4 weeks, and then I'm going to adjust, evaluate, or hey, this is my goal. I'm going to work backwards. If we can teach them little skills like that, it's going to set them up for when they're 30, 40, and 50, and then hopefully when they're teaching their own kids.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%, man. It really does come down to the principles because, some athletes, like I was talking to a guy this morning and he was saying how he's still doing the same, no joke. He's probably doing the same workout he was doing in high school for football.
Yeah.
And like, that's all he knows, which is fine. But just getting him to understand the basic principles and movement patterns. And look, we can talk different methods and variations all day, but if you follow these basic principles, you can learn, and if you pay attention, you'll learn how to make decisions on your own.
Keep it simple, stupid, right?
Yeah, man, 100%.
So,
So, but yeah, man, I know you're busy and you got to get back to. I'm sure you've got some programs to write and some reading to do and all that stuff. So I won't keep you. But you want people to be able to reach out to you at all? I mean, do you have any kind of contact info?
yeah, they can just hop on the Go Huskies will have that contact as well. I had just got back on social media. I was off it for a few years. So Coach Higgins with an underscore between Coach and Higgins. You can follow me that on Instagram. Again, I hadn't done it for a long time, and now it's such a valuable piece to learn. So I've just kind of started redoing it through quarantine and re-download it, and now putting some stuff out there as well. So I'm an open book. If people want to reach out and connect with me, like, I'm more than willing to help and assist, and I'm sure I'll learn something from you as well. So whether it's coaching with any of the sports that I have, or my experiences here, or any of the schools I've worked with, or really just anything you want to talk shop with, more than welcome to connect with anyone.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate you for having me on, man. Hope you and the family stay well.
All right. You too.